Welcome to this episode within the KIPS Podcast with Dr. Dan Ritchie of the Functional Aging Institute. My name is Tyler Valencia. I'm the president of KIPS and Time to Train Fitness. I've been in the fitness industry for roughly 18 years. I've been a personal trainer, group exercise instructor, fitness presenter, and I've also worked for education companies like Nesta and NCCPT. In this episode, and we're going to get to it in just a second, but we do touch on the topic of finding your niche. I'm going to take a little time here to discuss it a little bit further because I think it's important, not just for your career path and what you want to do, but for longevity, being able to stay in this industry. Something I've shared in different YouTube videos is how our annual turnover rate within this industry is 80% yearly. Now that number, it might be higher, but also it might be shorter in terms of the duration. I've talked to other managers, gym owners that have said it's much smaller than that. And so finding your niche, it's important because it's going to help you with finding your educational path. Investing in education is very important. It gives you more in-depth knowledge with your population and it helps you program better. On top of that, once you have your niche in mind, your marketing is going to become better. You're going to know how to market and find those trigger words that has that customer thinking, oh, okay, that does make sense to me. That is me. So these things all work together: longevity, fitness education, marketing, and that comes with finding your niche. I remember when I entered the industry that I was given this piece of advice about, oh, if you're a trainer, you can train anybody. And it probably wasn't the best piece of advice at that time. But now thinking about it, I should have been looking at what is my niche? What audience do I really speak to? And what audience can I really find myself enjoying waking up early, training late at night, because that's what it takes to make it in this industry. The hustle, the grind. So those are things that we do touch on in this episode. There's a lot of gems in there. Listen, take notes if you want to, but let's get to it. For listeners, Dr. Ritchie, can you give insight on your background, how you entered the fitness industry, what you're doing now, and your educational background as well?
Yeah, sure. I sort of chuckle now because I entered back in the 90s. Always wanted to train athletes, and I spent my first year actually as a Division I strength coach. And that 1 year was pretty informative for me because I realized this isn't what I want to do. So I got out of that field pretty quick, finished a master's degree, which is really where I fell in love with training older adults. I started actually training boomers in their 40s and 50s. This is now 25 years ago. And I realized, wow, there's a huge opportunity for helping people in their 50s, 60s and beyond. And so that led me to get a Ph.D. at Purdue, focused 5 years on research and balance interventions for people in their 60s and 70s. How do we basically keep people from falling and hurting themselves as they get older? So a different aspect of athletic performance. But then from there, I sort of realized, hey, there's a lot more to it than just training for balance. And I've spent the next 20 years kind of developing all the training models for older adults.
Yeah. When did the FAI come into all this? What was the thought behind it, or what was kind of that spark to make you start a business like that?
Yeah. So Cody, my business partner, and I were at Purdue working on our PhDs, and he was more in the power training world and I was in the balance training world, and we were just looking at what are all the different things you need to train to help older adults perform better, right? And so in a lot of ways, it's still athletic performance, it's human performance, it's I want to function well in my 70s and 80s, right? If I'm going to live to 95, I don't want to do it in a wheelchair. So what do I have to train? And so we wound up opening a training studio first, and that led us to developing what became the functional aging training model. And what we realized was fitness owners, fitness studios just weren't ready for, hey, you should be training older adults. And so through a mentor, we basically decided to launch a certification company, and we named it the Functional Aging Institute. And our whole focus was, we're going to train the industry how to train older adults for better function, right? And so we knew at that point, after training over 1,000 clients, that people in their 60s and 70s have money, they have need, they have some cases big desire. They still want to be healthy and strong and fit, and if nothing else, they want to be independent, right?
Yeah.
So I didn't spend 40 years to get to this stage of my life and then have my body fail me when now's the time I should be having the most fun, so that really led to the Functional Aging Institute being launched in the fall of 2013,
Mm-hmm.
about 6 years after we had opened our functional training studio.
Mm-hmm. With training athletes, working with the active aging population, what have been some of those moments you're like, I should do these things with athletes all the time? And now, I bring this up because oftentimes people think, oh, I can't train an athlete the same way that I train my active aging population. Then all of a sudden you start training the active aging population. Like, wait a minute, I was told this and it's completely wrong. What were some of those moments that you've had?
Yeah, I think it's really when you start to realize the principle of specificity applies to all domains, all aspects, right? And so when I had a client come in who was 80 years old and she's like, I want to go to the Galapagos Islands. And I'm like, okay, well, I've never been there. So break that activity down for me, right? Like, what does that mean? What do you have to be able to do, right? I'm like, I've trained Division I football players. I know what you have to do on a football field, right? What do you have to do going to the Galapagos Islands? She's like, well, I got to be able to get in and out of one of those Zodiac boats that Navy SEALs beach. I'm like, okay. And I'm thinking, wait, you're 80 and you have Parkinson's and you can barely walk a block. I'm like, okay, so I'm filing away the Zodiac boat. She's like, it hits the beach and they're not supposed to lift me out of the boat. I have to climb out of the boat onto the beach. She's like, I'm actually as nervous about the beach, right? I got to navigate the beach. So I'm thinking, okay, yeah, uneven terrain, sand. Then what? She's like, well, then it's pretty easy. I got to be able to walk about a mile on, paths. It's not overly rugged, but it's not ADA paved pavement, So we just sort of broke that down, right? What's the athletic task of climbing in and out of the Zodiac boat, right? It's like, well, you got to swing your legs over something. It's like, it's not as hard as blocking and tackling a 250-pound person that's also trying to block or tackle you, right? So like, Joanne, I think we can do this. Like if you're willing to train 3 times a week for 6 months, I think we can get your balance good enough for a beach. We can get you where you can climb in and out of a boat, and we can work up your cardiovascular endurance to walk a mile, So you just start breaking down the functional tasks or whatever the performance task is they want to do, right? And you realize, how do I train that specific thing, right? And pretty soon you're like, yeah, the seated chest press probably isn't going to be very important for this program, right? So you just get real, what I call task specific in terms of what it is they want to do. And then that's true of every client that comes in, right? Like, well, what functional tasks do you need to be able to do better, right? With greater strength, greater power, greater speed, greater balance, whatever the task really requires. And then it's just problem solving for clients, right? It's like, hey, I can solve this problem for you if you're willing to commit 2 to 3 times a week to train to get better, So it's really not much different than training an athlete that has a goal.
Yeah. And I'm going to tell a story here that I don't mean to ruin anybody's grand aspirations of working with athletes, professional athletes. One of my classmates in my Ph.D. program, he used to be one of the strength and conditioning coaches for a professional basketball team. And whenever I would talk with him about working with athletes, he would say, your goal is really just not to injure them. Professional, high level, $1 million athletes, you don't want to injure them. And he would tell me stories about, to be honest, they just wanted to come in. Sometimes they just want to stretch and then they would go home. And I think that there is this image in some people's mind that, oh, we're going to create these amazing programs for athletes. We're going to have them do this, this, and this. And it's really much simpler than that. And I'm sure the programs that a lot of great fit pros create these days for the active aging population, they're fantastic. They're packed with great programming. And yet there is this stigma that we need to put them in a chair. They need to do seated work when you could build them up to doing great activities. And I feel like it's part of your mission that you went out and you set out to create was, how do we change that stigma? How do we create great programming that fit pros and the clients can benefit from? So I always enjoy hearing these stories about those because
let's be honest, the vast majority of people, I'm 100% confident, Tyler, that you and I are going to make it through this entire interview and neither of us are going to fall out of our chair. Right. I can take that to the bank. And we could be in our 70s and I'd still be 100% confident we're not going to fall, and then it's like, oh, but we got to have 70-year-olds exercise in a chair. It's like, they're not having trouble with sitting. Yeah.
No.
No, it's counterproductive. It's like they're having trouble with navigating their environment, with climbing bleachers, with, certain elements in the environment that are a little more complicated. Why would we sit them down to exercise? It's counterproductive.
Agree. With your PhD program and when you were going through this process of working with D1 athletes and kind of looking at the active aging population, I'm sure you went through this similar process. I know that in all my schooling, I can't even tell you how much research I've read. I know that I just have a folder on my computer that just says research, and it just has this big library of PDF documents that are just filled with highlights. And I know that there's pieces that I've read throughout the years that really stood out to me, that impacted me and kind of shaped the way that I looked at programming for different populations. Do you have any in your mind that just come off the top of your head? They're like, oh, this is one, and kind of the insights of it?
Oh man, there's so many, honestly. Yeah. I think about how many journals I still have in my bookcases over here, of just research.
People listening like, what's a bookcase?
There's probably two fundamental ones that sort of framed what we did at the Functional Aging Institute that I think about. But yeah, I mean, there's hundreds of research studies. But there was one that came out in the early 2000s, and I think if you asked them, they really wanted to title it "Exercise: What Is It Good For Old People," right? But they titled it, "We May Have Oversold Exercise in Late Life," because what they couldn't find was any significant changes in disability, right? So if you're in your 70s, doesn't matter if you do cardio exercise, range of motion exercise. So they looked at cardio, flexibility, strength training. None of them were having an impact on disability. And so it was really kind of discouraging, right? It was like, maybe exercise really isn't all we thought it was for older people. It's not the fountain of youth. It's people are still getting older and they're still becoming on this path to disablement.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Cody and I started to look into that because you have to start to break research apart. You're like, oh, wait a minute. Let's look at what they really were looking at. And Cody and I, at this point, we're starting to develop our hypotheses of exercise is sometimes misunderstood, right? In fact, I think a lot of traditional exercise has been very cardio-based and very strength-based, right?
Mm-hmm.
You look at your typical health club, right? You have this huge cardio section with treadmills, ellipticals, and bikes, and all this great equipment for you to move your body, right? Which I'm sure people 100 years ago would be like, why the heck do you need all that? Do you not just walk and, do all, But we need that equipment to move, right? But it's very one domain focused, right? It's not applicable to all the things we have to do in life. Then you look at the strength training equipment. By and large, almost all the research was done on strength equipment that was machine-based, very fixed.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is what Cody and I saw was older adults doing cardio had huge improvements in cardiovascular fitness, but no measurable improvements towards disability. So we're like, that's interesting. They had huge improvements in strength and almost no outcome for disability. So we're like, interesting. So this is where we developed. The reality is you have to be training for the function you want to do in life, right? So if you want to stay out of a wheelchair, you want to keep climbing stairs, you want to be able to pick up a 20-pound object, all these different disability measures, guess what you got to do? You got to train for that exact thing, right?
Yep.
And so what we determined, then compiling over even more research, if all you train is strength, you have a very small impact on function, because strength is only one component of function. And we developed a model that says there's 6 domains of function when it comes to a human moving well, right? And strength is only one small portion of one piece. And so we realized you can improve strength 50%, which is huge. And what the researchers found was it only impacted function about 5%. It's like,
wow.
Well, yeah, because it's only one small parameter in this huge giant pie. And then the other really interesting study that I found fascinating, because I was particularly studying balance.
Mm-hmm.
The balance study that came out in the early 2000s that showed men who had poor balance and were actually categorized as fallers Put them through a strength training study, lower body only. And what they use? Leg extension, leg press, leg curl, right? Good machines for getting someone stronger. These guys got dramatically stronger. And guess what happened? Their balance scores got worse and they became bigger and better fallers. So I was like, aha. So just getting stronger doesn't solve my balance problem. I have to do all these other things. In fact, my one professor, she was like, we should be applauding them for even publishing this, because some people it was so far off from their hypothesis, right? Their hypothesis was, hey, get these guys stronger, their balance will improve. In fact, I'm sure the university was like, shut the study down. You're making these guys more dangerous. So that was really helpful, because it showed me function, especially balance, is so complex, right? It's multivariate. I can't just improve one thing. In fact, if I'm going to get people stronger, I'm irresponsible if I don't also get them more neuromuscular, more agile, more mobile, right? Because they don't know how to use that strength, especially from a machine to the real world.
Every new year, we hit the ground running as fitness professionals. We're teaching new classes, trying to grow our client list, and ultimately wanting to scale our fitness careers. At KIPS, we have something new coming in January: Fitness Builder Conference. 1 day of industry professionals sharing their insight on programming and fitness business tips to help you elevate into the new year. Get helpful insight from industry fit pros that are doing it now. And at the same time, get your continuing ed. Check out the link in the description for more information, and I hope to see you there.
I feel like this conversation here reminds me a lot of when I was talking with my last podcast guest, Amy Nicotera. We were talking about 3D movements, Viper Pro, and in a sense, flow movements and whatnot. And with some of those, I mean, there is kind of, I don't want to say that a similar stigma, but there is a perception of them that, oh, this is just for really athletic people, or, oh, this is for a certain population that basically people think that it's in its own area and that it's not applicable to everyone. With now active agers, I mean, if I could, I would show them what the Viper Pro is. I would show them these types of movements that are great, that are going to help them with balance, strength, all these kinds of things. For fit pros out there that they do want to do these types of movement-based exercises, what is some advice you would give them to help more the conversation that, hey, I know these are great for you. You might already be thinking these are too scary, too bad. What's some advice in that area?
Yeah, well, the first thing you're really talking about is a positive aging paradigm, right? So, yeah, we have Viper Pros in our facility. We've had them for 10 years, and we use them with 80-year-olds. Yeah. Why would we not? Yeah, that's just a normal thing to do. And so we have to break through that stigma of, well, what sort of athletic movement should a 70, 80, or 90-year-old do, right? And when we start watching videos and images of people like Johanna, still doing gymnastics in her 90s and parallel bars and tumbling in the vault, and you're like, wait, should a 95-year-old be springboarding off a vault? Sure, right? So we have to start reframing our mind in terms of what athletic performance and movement, and it gets down to the question of, well, what exercises should we be doing with 80-year-olds? Well, anything that serves their functional goals, right? So a Viper is a great tool. Suspension strap's a great tool. A medicine ball is a great tool. I mean, anything that you can use that's going to impact their functional performance is a great tool. And so we have to first reframe our mind, because I think what's happened is we've all been hurt by stereotypes that old people are weak or frail or incapable of doing fill in the blank exercise, right? Based on what? Who says a 20-year-old should use a Viper versus an 80-year-old, right? I mean, who came up with that rule, right? Now, are there some exercises that have higher risk for certain age groups? Sure, they absolutely do. There might be some exercises that aren't appropriate or no longer make sense because the risk reward doesn't make sense. But the reality is we've bought into this belief that to be old is to be weak or sick or frail or unable to do some sort of athletic. But if I showed you an 85-year-old that was downhill skiing, right, would you then say, oh, wait, but I can't have them doing the agility ladder work in the gym because that would be too dangerous. It's like, I just showed you them downhill skiing moguls. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you hit it on the nose with the risk reward part there. I think that is all fit pros need to be looking at. I know that there are so many exercises that, I mean, not to dive too deep into social media here, that you see younger fitness pros putting their clients through, and the risk is just too heavy for me, for my own perspective. And
for sure. For even the average 30-year-old, it's like the risk here is too high.
Agree.
It's not worth it. I have said, I stopped barbell bench pressing when I was 33. Because I realized even in my own physiology and my own shoulders that like the risk reward here no longer makes sense, right? No one cares that I can bench. I mean, somebody might be impressed if I said, oh, I can bench 350, but like the reality is nobody really cares when you're in your 30s, right? Like no. I'm not winning any competitions. I'm not competing in it, and my shoulders hurt. So it's like, why am I still doing this, right? And so I gave up that exercise, switched to push-ups and dumbbell bench press, and my shoulder pain went away and my shoulder mobility got better and I didn't have shoulder impingement anymore. Yeah. And then I start hearing about other people my age and older tearing their pecs, barbell bench pressing. And I'm like, man, I'm glad I retired that exercise because that risk reward is terribly out of whack. Like, I don't want to tear a pec, like I had a dentist friend of mine at 41, I think he was, tore his pec. Not only was the injury catastrophic for him, but his dental practice lost him as a dentist for 12 weeks, and it's like, it was a nightmare when you think about risk reward, right? And then he was honest. He's like, I didn't even want to be doing that stupid exercise. He's like, I don't even know why I was doing it.
100%. Yeah. I mean, I feel like that has been the start of many fitness consultations that I've had when I used to do a lot more training was, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm mostly just following the program that I did when I was in college, and now they're 60 plus. And so why? Why are you still doing these exercises? Why were you just doing the bench press when you don't even need it? And I think it's, I
joke, the barbell bench press has its place for certain people, but for the most part, it's really it's not that functional of an exercise, right? I'm like, unless your 80-year-old female client has the fridge fall on her in the kitchen, when is she ever going to be on her back doing a 1 rep max bench press? It's like, it's not useful. So do it standing, do it with a cable, do it pressing on your feet. Yeah. She might have to push something, right? She's never going to be laying on her back having to push a fridge off of her. It's just not functional.
Agree. I'd like to segue the podcast now into a little bit more about advice for fit pros, new fit pros. That's been a big area that I focused a lot of more recent KIPS content, new fit pros, and getting into the industry. Something that I've mentioned in a previous podcast is how, sadly, there is a high turnover rate in our industry. Personal trainers come in, fit pros come in, and they sadly have to leave after 1 year or before 1 year. They just can't make a career out of it. I think a piece of that is maybe not knowing where to go, not knowing where to start. For you have spoken at all the major conferences, created your own fitness education company, gym, all kind of great stuff that when I look at other fitness instructors out there, fit pros out there, if they've made it past the first year, they're doing something great. There's obviously something that's working for them. For advice now for fit pros that are looking at a second certification or a second course, what do you usually recommend for them to, hey, this might be a great area to look in?
Well, I'm a little biased because obviously I created education and certifications around training older adults, but I just tend to give people advice based on, who's going to be great clientele for you for years to come, right? Yeah. And so if you've lasted a year, you've worked hard, you've probably learned a few things, you've probably made some mistakes, but you're still here. You have to start focusing on clientele that are going to help you grow a business that allows you to stay in this long term, right? And so unfortunately, so many great fitness pros leave after about 2 or 3 years because they realize I got to grow up and get a real job, right? It's like, this isn't a career. This is nothing more than a side hustle. And part of the trap is really, really good hustlers can make decent living. And then at some point they realize, but nobody wants to date someone that works from 5 a.m. to 9 a.m. and then from 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. Right? It's like, when are we going out to dinner? I'm free on Sunday. I mean, it's just not a good lifestyle. And I'm free for lunch. I mean, it just doesn't work real well, right? At some point you realize I can't be somebody's partner. And so people that last a really long time doing that, right, get into their 30s and realize I still can't keep doing this. So I say you have to start looking at who are your absolute best clients, and you need to go get more of them. Yeah. And a lot of times, almost every time, what happens is people come back and, my really best clients are women in their 50s and 60s because they're consistent, they will pay, and they don't have to come at 5 a.m. Right. In fact, they want to come at 8 a.m., 9 a.m., 10 a.m. Right. And I'm like, exactly. Bingo. You want to go after boomer women. They're the most powerful consumer right now in the United States. They have the most spending power and they know what they want. Right. And so if that's not who you want to train, determine who your best client is. Right. You might be listening right now going, I really help people that have hip and knee problems. Right. Doesn't matter whether they're male or female. Then get super focused on that. So your next certification should be more knowledge about hips and knees, right? You should get more education on knee replacements or hip replacements or hip impingement or, what's the thing that you're helping the most? So get even more, go deeper, become more of an expert, right? Because let's be honest, in most markets, there are enough people with hip or knee pain to probably sell you out for the rest of your career, right? So I tell people, do the opposite, right? A lot of trainers are like, I want to train anyone and everyone. Like, no, don't do that. Specialize, niche down. Just don't make your niche so super tight, right? Sometimes people are like, I only want to train people with Parkinson's. Well, you have to do a little bit of market research, right? I live in a university town of 40,000 people. There's only about 50 people with Parkinson's in West Lafayette. Then you look across the river in Lafayette and there's maybe another 150 with Parkinson's. Like 200 people in an entire market is not enough, right? Like you need a few more than that. So you look at women 50 to 70 and all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, there's 7,000 of them in my market. If I just capture 70 of them, I'm booked solid, forever. So specialize, but get hyper focused on who it is, just be honest. I think sometimes people are afraid to be like, what? I have 2 clients I really, really love. And if I had 20 more of them, my life would be amazing. Well, then focus on getting 20 more of them, right? Learn everything you can about those 2 to where it's almost creepy, right? It's like, I'm kind of stalking Bev. Like, where's Bev go to lunch? Who's her massage therapist? Who's her hairstylist? Like, you want to know everything about Bev so you can get 20 more people just like Bev, right? Yeah. And of course, ask Bev, hey, can you introduce me to 5 of your friends? Because I'd love to train them, So simplify your process instead of just training people that don't fit or you don't enjoy or don't really get your program. Go after the clients you really love.
Oh, yeah. What's always fascinating to me is when you hear good advice and it's almost word for word similar to something else. And let me dive into that a little bit more with YouTube. I'm a big fan of YouTube. I own a YouTube-based business, and some of the best advice you will ever hear for if you want to start on YouTube as a fit pro is what's your niche. The more specific you get, the more likely that you could grow quicker on YouTube as a platform. And not only does it help you with growing a channel, but all the items that you just mentioned with learning about that audience. What's the language that you want to speak to them with? What is their tendencies so that you can market to them better? Those are all good pieces of advice that often will translate across different industries, different ways of focusing on business. And to me, that's just a sign of, that is what you should be doing when you hear the almost word for word same thing in a completely different realm of growing a business. So, I mean, I think what I liked what you mentioned there is asking them questions because I think these days we forget the power of word of mouth and the ability to let your own clientele help you build a business. And I think maybe because it's not an immediate return, you first have to go find those clients. But the word of mouth aspect is huge.
Well, I say, the biggest mistake I think a lot of early trainers make is they think, oh, well, I'm a great trainer because I'm getting referrals, right? So I just rely on word of mouth. I don't do any marketing or advertising. I always say, if you're relying on word of mouth, you're putting your business and trusting it to your clientele to grow it, right? Mm-hmm. Which is never a good strategy, right? Has any company ever done that, right? Like, I'm going to 100% trust that my customer in the drive-through line is going to tell the next 10 people to come to our drive-through line. Like, that's not how businesses operate. So I say, instead of relying on word of mouth, foster word of mouth, create word of mouth, grow word of mouth, right? Yes. So those two best clients you have, figure out how you can infiltrate their network, right? Does Bev have a charity group that she would love to invite you to? Right? Does Bev have a hair salon stylist that she'd be happy to introduce you to? Right? Pretty soon you start to tap into her network, right? And you figure out ways to do that with what I call a giving hand, right? You go to Bev's hairstylist and say, hey, I have $100 fitness transformation gift card I'd love you to give to your next 5 customers, right? And she's like, whoa, that's kind of cool. Like, my customers will be super thrilled that I'm giving them $100 gift, right? So there are ways you can get creative to build word of mouth, right? Because I hate to tell you, as much as Bev likes you as a trainer, she's not spending her day trying to think about how to grow your business. She's just not. So let's create ways for her to generate word of mouth that are easy for her. And then, boom, your business takes off.
I love it. I love that little application tip there. Fantastic for anybody listening. And I mean, all the steps too, you just included. Love it. I'd like to transition now to the podcast takeaways as we wrap up this episode here. Great insight already. And I always take and tell the speakers that come on the podcast, this is wherever they want to take it. It's each guest that comes on comes from a different area of the fitness industry. So hearing their insights, their advice is always important for me in this episode, but also the listeners. So Dr. Ritchie, what are 3 myths about the fitness industry?
Phrased it as no health club membership in the history of fitness has ever gotten anyone in shape, right? And no one's ever refuted that because they were like, well, yeah, of course, a health club membership in and of itself doesn't do anything for you. So, so it's about progress programming over time, right? And so the reason personal trainers are so important is that the average person doesn't know how to come into a health club and figure it out, right? Yeah. If they did, we wouldn't even need health clubs in most cases, right? People would already know how to be fit because they would know how to do it on their own. So, so that's a big myth, right? Is that health club memberships get people in shape. Another huge myth, I think, that still permeates the fitness industry is that older adults don't want to exercise, right? And we still see this, right? If you look at the vast majority of the fitness industry, and I would say about 90% of it, it's still focused on the under 50 crowd. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to turn 50 next year, which means I'm no longer relevant in the fitness industry, right? But then you realize half of the United States is now 50 and over, right? Yeah. And the fitness industry has basically said, well, if you're over 50, you're probably not interested in working out, right? Yeah, you've gotten too old for it, right? And that's just a giant myth, right? People over 50, in fact, start to increase their interest in exercise for results, right? They start to realize, I need to do something to stay healthy, to stay feeling good, all these sorts of things. So, so big myth there. The third one that I am really, it's kind of a shift from even the fitness world, but the third big one that I'm working on now is brain health, right? Mm-hmm. And so I see a huge, the myth is that there's nothing you can do about your brain, right? That, as you get older, you're either going to get Alzheimer's or you're not, right? It's just sort of a luck of the draw, right? And there's a big myth around brain health. And I think we're going to see in the next 5 to 10 years, an explosion in brain health, brain fitness, brain gyms, people realizing that like this is as big an opportunity as personal training, as health globes, partly due to the age of our country, right? Right now we have about 70 million people age 60 to 78, and they're on the precipice of an Alzheimer's epidemic like we've never seen, right? And so the Alzheimer's numbers are already staggering. And now we have the largest generation in U.S. history, the baby boomers, heading into the Alzheimer's time, right? As they start to turn 80 is where we see this big uptick, right?
Yeah.
The statistics right now, Tyler, are predicting that 1 in 2 baby boomers are going to be directly impacted by Alzheimer's, either by having it themselves or having to caregive for a family member, right? Whether it's a spouse, a sister, another family member. And so when you think about 35 million people being directly impacted by Alzheimer's, either through having it or having to care for someone full time, that's going to have a massive impact on our country.
Massive,
So that is I think a big myth that people underestimate how powerful the fitness industry and even the wellness industry is going to have a huge opportunity in the brain space.
Oh yeah. I would say from my perspective, that is extremely low hanging fruit for Fit Pros. I think there has been a voice that says that, when I exercise, I just want to turn off my brain. I just want to mindlessly go through a routine. I want someone to show me how to do X, Y, or Z. When using your brain throughout exercise and coaching and cueing those items is huge. I think it elevates you as a Fit Pro when you are cueing someone to feel or to keep their brain on throughout movement so they know what they're doing. And so fascinating stuff that I think will definitely be explored more in our industry. And before we sign off here, do you have any events coming up? Can you throw out your website, social media, all that kind of great stuff?
Yeah. So two websites to give folks, functionalaginginstitute.com for sure. If you want to learn more about training older adults. The other one that I'm really excited about is that brain fitness piece. So marblesfitness.com is a new brain gym idea and concept that's coming. So those would be 2 websites where people can learn more about me and kind of what I'm up to these days.
Great stuff. I will have those in the description for any listeners, whether on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. But thank you, as always, Dr. Ritchie, for coming on the KIPS Podcast, sharing some great insight and making a great episode.